Thanks very much. I'm pleased to be here today. I'll just explain a little bit of my background because of how I'm going to talk about human development. And essentially, I've been in the business a long time in railways, been a managing director, a director in major large consulting firms, so I understand people and HR in that regard. I've worked in a whole range of roles across the railway sector, right from transaction advisor, going through the whole spectrum through to operations and maintenance areas. I've done training, I've worked for training organisations, I've worked for SRT on the red line on training, MRTA here on the orange line on training. Okay, that will be a bit better, sorry. And I've also done a whole lot of work across the various activities, and so I try to relate that to what's required for human development. Today I'll talk about the railway life cycle because what's needed there, typical career paths, transitions, competency, career stages, staff development, what's happening in the region, what DB Railway Academy does to support DB and the railway sector in education, human development, career paths, and a few other things like that. Now, my daughter said this is a very messy, ugly slide, and why was I showing it? Primarily to show the complexity of all the railway elements that are involved in a railway project and some of the things that human development is dependent upon. So I won't labour that slide because she didn't like it. This slide is an important slide. If you've been involved in design and railways, you've heard probably about the V-curve. This is the curve that takes the very beginning of the project where the concept and the planning's made, goes through the design elements, right through to contracting, manufacturing, installing, going up through testing and commissioning, right into operations and maintenance. That's important because that's career paths and activities for people working in the sector. I've made this slide even more confusing by adding lots of key functional areas that we do when we're working. We may be involved in requirements management, we may be involved in stakeholder management, a whole raft of activities that various people will get skills in, and it all supports the human development of people working in our sector. Now, I had to think about this, about what actually happens and what's a typical career path like. There's a range of ages in here, and some of you are just starting off and some have probably been through a long career. Now, does an ideal career path look like this in railways? Probably not, but it's the starting point. We're looking at the study that you do at education. Then you've probably got no idea what you're going to do, but you then move on to essentially an S-curve where you learn more on the job, you get mastery, and at some stage you get fat and happy, maybe a little bit lazy, moving right on to maybe when you're bored and then you retire. But it's not really like that, is it? It's more complicated. This one shows the same curve, but the curve at the beginning, and if you've been working 2 or 3 years, you potentially become to a bit of a stall. You know what you're doing, you're pretty good at it, what happens next? And then if you're working for a common firm or a common job, you start to learn other skills, and each of those have their own little S-curves where you start to learn, and then you master the skills, and you move right up again. Maybe you get bored again, maybe you retire. Like me, I never got a chance to retire, so I kept on going, and I kept on ending up being an expert in a whole range of things. So careers can be quite interesting. We take the last curve, and it's not always necessarily a curve that transitions on. There are periods in a curve where you will transition. You will change from one job and one nature of a job to something that's relatively different. You may move from an other sector into the railway sector. You may move out of the railway sector, backwards and forwards. I've worked in railways a lot, I've worked in airports a lot. So it happens, and so the same curve there. And the interesting thing here is I've highlighted Deutsche Bahn. They have a focus on that. They have a look at what we're doing for job opportunities and what people are doing. So that's all part of the company philosophy as far as employer development. A little bit complicated, but what happens to people? Okay, if you start off on the left, you go to high school, you get your education, you go through your bachelor's degree. If you're lucky, you get an internship with somebody who helps you during that stage. You may go off and do a postgraduate degree. Now that seems to be very common these days, and people have to do that. But then you come back and you get a job, you start as a graduate engineer, you move up the levels. You may go off and do postgraduate, you may do that overseas. And I expect a lot of people here have. You go overseas, you get overseas experience, and then you may work abroad. For me, it happened the other way around. My working over abroad has been back in Thailand. But you go through your life, you have your certificates, you get extra skills, and you may move right through to become a company manager or something like that. You may become the director of a firm. You may move out of that, you may move back to alternative career paths in academia, or you may have been in academia after your initial education. So it's a complicated flow of various opportunities that you will have. That's just we won't go through all of that, but I've just copied out for ease of looking at those various stages, the sort of levels of work that you might go through. So if you want to look at the slides at a later date, you can. It's important though, when you've got a job, particularly if you're in the railway sector, you're working in operations and maintenance, there are transitions, and I talked about transitions. An example on the technical side is, well, let's take me as an example. I started off as a mechanical engineer. I did acoustics, I got a degree in that. But my first real job was as a building services HVAC engineer. Then that moved on, and I ended up absorbing more of the other M&E type things, and I ended up in a technical services department. So a little bit like this person here that's been maybe starting off as lift and electrical, lift and escalators, then moves into fire and the other disciplines. So you can expand it, you transition from one area to another, either directly transition across or you expand your role. So that happens. DB worries about that and helps support those activities so people aren't necessarily stuck in one little box all the way through. Okay, we're talking about operations and maintenance in railways. There are transitions there. The example we're looking at here, you may have started off as in sales, an assistant controller. You may have started off as an HR controller. You may have started off in finance. Again, your career paths will diverge, merge, and they will grow. And you need to be aware of that, or we need to be aware of that for the people working for us, because that's all part of human development. I'll mention this a couple of times. Deutsche Bahn is German railways, which I don't think I mentioned at the very beginning. We operate all the railways in Germany and out through Europe, buses, do all sorts of things like that. The sector that I work for is more in engineering and consulting, and that's an element of it. But part of the company, we have another group called the DB Rail Academy. It provides training both internally and it provides it externally for the railway sector around the world. Competency is one of the key things I think we need to consider in our sector. In any job, you have to be competent to be able to succeed. But it's particularly important in engineering when you've got to design things properly so they don't fall down and they don't break. You have to be competent so that when you're operating a railway, it's safe. So competency is an innate component of the sector that we work in, the railway sector. But competency is also competency of the individual. You expand your competency, your ability to do your job, and things like that. So there's a big effort made in that regard. And again, DB worries about that. It can be right at the level of the worker level, but it's also at management. And you could argue that in a lot of cases, managers become managers because they just moved up the tree. But there's a lot of skills managers need to know and become competent in a big sector like the railway sector, a big business sector, operations and maintenance. Competency is integral to human development. Okay, there are a number of stages that people will go through. As the first stage is your aware and engagement. That's when you're really starting your career. And here in Thailand, I think there's a lot of emphasis made on that. I think a lot of the people here are from universities and institutions out there where that requirement for training is going on. There's even a stall out there for the hub of talent in Thailand. So I think that's a key element to what happens. And that the more that can grow and people use it, both from people coming up out of university and school, and for us in the private sector supporting those areas. So you have outreach projects, programs, industry partnerships. You need to consider the region. Thailand's a part of APAC, part of the world, but we've got neighbours like Malaysia, and we've got neighbours like the Chinese, where a lot of the railway sector is integral with those now. And the government-backed initiatives, RTA has been developing here and those things, so I think that's all stronger. I was a project manager for MRTA for 10 years, Green Line and Orange Line, and they're very good. They're very structured internally for developing a lot of their elements for their staff. Training needs analysis, that's very important. Training is integral all through a person's career and life cycle. Skill development and specialisation. I think I've lost track of my time. My timer says I've got 2 minutes left, but I don't know whether that's right. I've got about 10 minutes or something, yeah, okay. Skill development, advanced technical training, mentorship programs. That's very important in the engineering sector. I've been involved in a lot of that. You start a job, a young guy comes in, and you sort of buddied up together. You keep an eye on him, see what he's doing, you give him assignments to do, you talk to him, and you enable him to plan his career and move through. So these are important things. Certification and accreditation, okay, so I speed up a bit. Leadership and management skills are very important, competency training, and again, that's where I mentioned it earlier about the DB Academy going through, teaching us what we need to do. Staff development all the way through, executive coaching, mentoring, exposure to the global best practices. We're very lucky in that regard because we work for a global company. But if you're working for a small company in Thailand, you need to get your exposure there. Staff development. Here, although I'm more in the consulting and engineering side, for the operations and maintenance of railways, things like the Chartered Institute of Railway Operators has programs for helping the development of people in those areas. Okay. Core areas, technical engineering, operations and safety. We mustn't forget that because that's totally integral to our business. And the other thing that's important, maintenance of assets and the elements downstream, and now digital and technology that's coming in. Use of AI, all of those elements are becoming so important. Areas we have to worry about now in Thailand, high-speed rail, Malaysia's having it, Vietnam's looking at it, Asia Erawan, etc., etc., etc. It's an area. Mass transit, very well developed here, pretty well established, and the organisations know what they're doing. passenger and freight. Yeah, it's telling me I'm running out of time. Passenger and freight railway, a big area to expand. SRT is providing the infrastructure, but they've got to be able to operate it. We have regulatory compliance, we have PPP, and all of those elements. Training academies, all throughout APAC. We have a lot here, very important. I won't go into details. Regional initiatives like Singapore, training centres again. Our DB training centres are so important. Again, helping what's happened. Not only do we do training across the roles and functions, because we operate railways, we know what we need to know. Okay, global experience, middle management training we provide in Kazakhstan, consulting in Buenos Aires, developing expertise, training schools. We help establish those for 50 people, 500 people, drivers, whatever's needed. Human development, that's a picture of SRT people. I was training on the Red Line when we had COVID because the Japanese couldn't find anybody to come here, so I got roped into that. The SRT people, kids from the airport rail link, really good. I learnt a lot, teaching people a lot. Key considerations, human development. I was going to speed up a bit now. Key aspects, human development. Workforce safety, again, is important. Human-centric, digitalisation, so important to what we're doing. Collaborative elements, all of these things need to be considered. There's a lot on these slides, and so you can, if you want, you can look at them later, because I want to move along. The various career paths we have. As I'm at 13 minutes, I'm going to try and wrap up at 15. I want to move through to the end. But in here, interestingly, DB International Operations. This is just a list of all the careers and key activities that you might need to be involved in or you can get involved in. Similarly, DB Engineering and Construction, Consulting, which is the consulting arm, all the various elements that we need to put in there. This is just to show you the spectrum of work that's available, and the spectrum of work employs on your human development, where you're going to go. So don't get stuck. Be aware of what's in front of you so that you can move forward if you're looking at your own career, even if you're a youngster or you've been around for a long time. Okay, the workforce, again, competency. We need to enhance the rail first diversity and inclusion. It's good to see a lot of women here working in Thailand, women working on my jobs as engineers, everybody very capable, and I think that works quite well in Thailand. DB has career development programs, promote internal careers, contracting, certification, embedded learning, job matching, all of these things DB as a big company worries about. If you're a smaller company, we won't write. Okay, some advice giving to employees. Staying because it's easy, don't do that. Don't live on other people's dreams, rely on others to drive your career, don't do that. Thinking everyone's your friend, waiting for the perfect moment. All of these things you need to be aware of as an individual. Similarly, companies need to be aware of what they're doing. And typical examples, employees just don't want a paycheck. People deserve to get paid what they want. So these are key things, a raft of things that you need to worry about if you're an employer for people. Okay, I've got 2 slides left, so I think I'm about nearly there. But I think human development is very much a cultural and environmental element. I put this in from about photos just dragged from my past in just the last 10 years. Working in India, a very culturally sensitive environment. The firm there was aware of it and did that. Worked with MRTA and the governor of MRTA, rubbed shoulders with the elite, all the people I worked with. This is a good one. That's me. I got taken by this chap on one of his company's training courses. We had to walk on fire. That's real 2 or 3 meters walking on fire. It can be done. And I only got a little blister. And so my last slide, to run out of time. There's a work-life balance you need. Health and fitness, the community and family, your growth, new worlds, getting on a plane, going to places. I've done a lot of that. Some of you come from working overseas. Knowledge, change, and fulfillment. Okay, that was all a bit rushed. 15 minutes is hard to cover everything I've got in there, but I'm just trying to paint an overall picture so that if you want to go back and think about that, you can. So, or you can ask me questions anytime. Good. I hope I've kept on track.
Thank you very much for sharing your experience with us.